Okay, now I talked a little bit about Churchill. Speaking of someone who doesn't give in, who never quits, is my good friend and fellow CMT patient, Jamal Hill. I got to know Jamal at this very conference just a year or two ago, and I was immediately taken by his character, by his confidence, by his commitment, and his desire to do good in this world. Jamal is not only a Paralympian, as you'll come to find out, he's also a person who works tirelessly to ensure water safety for everyone in the world. He has this audacious goal, which I love, which is to teach 1 million people to swim before the 2028 Olympics. I think it's awesome, Jamal, and I know you're going to do it for sure. He also is part of a group called Aquatics Today. He leads that, and that's a group that provides water safety and other water-related safety programs for young people, but really for anyone. So we all saw him on TV just a few weeks ago participating in the Paris Paralympics. My good friend Jamal Hill, come on up here and motivate us as you always do. Thanks, Jamal.
Yes, sir. I guess few people have said good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for that introduction. As you said, my name is Jamal Hill. I am a two-time Paralympian and medalist, and I've been living with CMT1X for 19 years. I have been living shame-free for 5 years. Round of applause, round of applause. So that's an interesting way to open up, right? What does shame-free mean? So when I talk about shame-free, what I'm really talking about is that sense of not belonging and really not having any visible cues for other people to understand why you feel that way. I carried that shame for most of my diagnosis, not wanting anyone to think anything was wrong with me, and quite frankly, not wanting to acknowledge that I'd actually allowed myself to come and begin to think less of myself. My experience in just how CMT affects my body, from my knees to the soles of my feet, I've got 0% nerve capacity. And from my elbows to my fingertips, I've got about 30% nerve capacity. And I'm so honored to be a part of the CMT community. It may be a strange thing to say. I know we're working here to cure it, so I hope we get the cure soon. But as long as we're still working on it, I'm so happy to be a part of this community. And last year at this conference, if you were here, if you watched, you know what's coming next. If this is your first time or you missed last year, then you're in for a treat. I announced that CMT won't stop me. And our community heard that, and it resonated with them so strongly that they announced CMT won't stop us, and we all became unstoppable. So what most people don't know, though, is the story that inspired me to become unstoppable. And with permission, I want to share that story with you today. Is that all right? Yeah. All right. It's a relief. So the story is it's the parable of the bigger catapult. Bear with me here. This is going to be a fun one. So long time ago, in a time where kings were seen as the very embodiment of the sun on earth, right? That their rule was everything. There was a great king. And this king wanted to be exalted amongst all other kings. He wanted his rule to be undeniable. And so as he looked up into the sky, he saw a great, beautiful cloud, and the king decided, I want to build a royal suite upon that cloud. And so the idea seemed impossible, right? Yet the king believed that his reign over earth, it would only be underscored if he could get to this cloud. So he summoned the most esteemed scientists in the kingdom to his royal court, and he demanded that they reach the cloud. Say, you guys got to figure something out, because that cloud's calling my name. You know I'm a great king, but we need the whole world to know. Now, in those days, catapults were instruments that they used to launch, projectiles across large distances. Everything came down to catapults. So the scientists, of course, reflecting on tradition, reasoned that what the king needed wasn't just any catapult, it was the biggest catapult to ever be made. So with the king's command echoing that of the scientists, ultimately all the forests were scoured for wood and timber. There were large rocks that were quarried for anchors. There were thousands and thousands of miles of rope that were woven, because this is a big undertaking. You think about Leave It to Beaver slingshot, we're talking about a slingshot about as big as the Royal Sonesta here, okay? This is a big slingshot. At last, the day arrived. It was time to test it. And the slingshot, towering, okay, very majestic, it stood ready before the king, and the scientist was so proud. He was feeling good. The scientist pulled the lever. The capsule soared into the air, flying higher than any projectile before it. It broke a world record, but it still fell short of the clouds. The king's brow furrowed. Bigger. That's what the scientist said. Bigger, bigger, my king. We have to build it bigger. That last catapult wasn't large enough. That's where we made our mistake. Don't worry, though, Your Highness. We're going to construct an even grander catapult. And so they returned to the forest, cutting down even more trees, depleting the land of its natural beauty, and a second slingshot, even greater than the first one, was constructed. But still, it didn't reach the clouds. You can imagine the scientists now getting a little bit desperate. I don't know if any of you have ever been a part of a kingdom, but when the king gives you an assignment and you fail 2 times, you're not on a good track here, okay? And so he's like, okay, I'm so sorry, Your Highness. I've got it this time. I know last time and the time before that we thought it just needed to be bigger, but this time it actually just needs to be even bigger. So again, they go out, they take out the rest of the forest. This time they even go into the kingdom, they start tearing down homes in the kingdom because they need all these supplies, they need all these things. And now the kingdom has sacrificed so much for this great catapult, yet still, when he pulls the lever, the clouds are not reached. I know you're loving the story. I got to take a pause here just because, you see, the scientist in this story, he was missing something here. He just kept thinking that more of the same was going to get him to his goal. He thought that going from an okay catapult to a good catapult would be the same type of difference from going to a good catapult to something great enough to reach the sky, right? And whatever level you're at, whatever you're doing, especially me as a Paralympic athlete, that's what drives me. It's not so much about going from okay to good. It's going from good to great where the real challenge is. And it's not always just as simple as more and bigger. So the king is growing impatient, as you can imagine. And he summons the scientists once again. Hey, look, you've destroyed everything now. We have no wood. There's no trees. What are you going to do? And the scientist is there. He's thinking. He's not feeling as confident anymore. Can you guess what he said? That was a good guess. We've got to build it bigger, Your Majesty. The last 3, trust me, I know they seem huge, but they just weren't big enough. The clouds look close, but they're actually very far, okay? We've broken records. We can do this. And there's just no other way. This is it. This is the only thing that can happen. But before the king could say, okay, you know what, go ahead, you can do it, there was a voice in the court that came from the back, and a young woman stepped up. And this young woman, she wasn't known necessarily for her acumen in science, but she was known for her wisdom. She stepped up and she requested to be able to speak before the king. And she began by saying, perhaps we do not need something bigger. Perhaps what we seek cannot be reached by stretching what we know in the same way. Tell me more, says the king. Well, if our aim is to touch the clouds, she said, then perhaps we must not think of launching ourselves at them. Instead, we must learn to rise to their level. Very intriguing. Please, go on. Well, maybe what we don't need is a bigger slingshot, Your Highness. Maybe what we need are wings. And so she continued to tell the king about her vision. Well, about building something, not to hurl a man into the sky, but to ascend and glide on the wind itself, to build a machine that mimicked the flight of birds, carrying the king not by force, but by grace into the clouds. Now, this was a radical idea. These are catapult people, and you're talking about building wings here? Slow down. You can imagine the court is in murmurs. A little bit like now, silent murmurs, very respectful, but there's a lot of disbelief. I don't want you to miss this here. Anyone can make an impact. Even those people sometimes that we feel are not the most qualified or not the most outspoken, never underestimate yourself or anyone else's ability, because this young woman, she's about to do something amazing for the whole kingdom. Now, the king is so interested, he's like, okay, you know what? The bigger and the better, this is not working. You're talking about wings. You have a very poetic voice to you. I'm sold. Let's do it. The work was not easy. It was slow. It was filled with trials and errors. But bit by bit, the young woman's vision began to take shape. She constructed a glider and designed it. And after many other attempts, something remarkable happened. The glider was able to lift the king off the ground. It didn't reach the clouds on the first flight, nor the second, but the king saw something greater than what they had originally imagined, a new way of thinking, of seeing the world not through the lens of what was, but what could be. In time, the king didn't just stand on the clouds, but upon the wings of an idea that transcended the limits of the past, an idea that will one day lead all of us, the entire world, into a much brighter future. The king reached the sky. CMT research has been more in the last couple years than at any point in my life. For so long, and we've heard this time again, for so long, we've been in a court where people just wanted to do the same thing bigger, more, adding on. That's got to be the solution. And we're reaching this influx where we're realizing, no, it's time to do things differently. If we want to reach that cloud, the catapult just won't cut it. Breaking records isn't bringing about a cure. Now, I studied physics in college, and I understand a lot of you are scientists here, so I feel a bit at home saying this. It's my own little nice ending to the story. Once the king was in the sky and he's gliding and he comes down, you can imagine it takes a lot of velocity to get that high in the sky. He's coming down on this cloud. In physics, I learned this principle. It's called the law of inertia. And that means that things in motion tend to stay in motion. So even when the king was in the highest of heights and he was still coming down onto this cloud, he didn't just land and stop. As he came down, he had to keep that momentum. He hit the ground running, as we say. Everyone living with CMT, I'm sure you know this, that disease is not taking any days off. Even as we sit here and we learn about all these amazing projects that are happening, as we honor our amazing CMT Research Foundation staff, board, community, fundraisers that are reaching these new heights and getting us closer and closer to a cure, our job isn't done yet. So, the only thing I have left to say to you is, don't take even a day off, regardless of the heights that we reach. Choose to be unstoppable. Thank you.